A reading from Matthew 21:18 through 22. In the morning, as Jesus was returning to Jerusalem, he was hungry, and he noticed a fig tree beside the road. He went over to see if there were any figs, but there were only leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." And immediately the fig tree withered up. The disciples were amazed when they saw this and asked, "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" Then Jesus told them, "I tell you the truth. If you have faith and don't doubt, you can do things like this and much more. You can even say to this mountain, 'May you be lifted up and thrown into the sea,' and it will happen. You can pray for anything, and if you have faith, you will receive it."
Thank you for reading. So my takeaway from that passage is that Jesus is dramatic. It seems like quite the overreaction, right? And that's when in our culture, in our time, when we use the word dramatic, that's typically what we mean, right? Some sort of response that is at odds with, it doesn't line up with the initial event or infraction, right? So here's Jesus coming into town. He's hungry. He sees a fig tree. It's got some leaves on it. Comes up to it to get something to eat, but finds that there's no figs and curses it for always and eternity. And then enters into town. So initial first reading, Jesus was hangry, and a Snickers bar would have made this whole point moot. Today is Palm Sunday. I preached last year on Palm Sunday, so I don't know why that keeps happening. I think 2 times makes it a tradition now, one that I didn't sign up for. But Palm Sunday, right? It's the time where we observe, right, Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, entering into what we call Holy Week, which was the last week of his life. And I remember last year, one of the points that I made on this Sunday was, Jesus riding a borrowed donkey, entering into Jerusalem, that was a prophetic act, right? That was an act of prophecy, right? It was recalling something written in Zechariah 9:9. But it was prophetic, not in the sense that it was something written long ago that came true. It was prophetic in the sense that Jesus knew that people knew that passage, knew what they were looking for and were expecting, and was acting that out, right? He was enacting it, bringing it to their attention. So he was communicating something through his actions there. So I'm going to propose this morning that we look at this passage through the lens that Jesus was dramatic, not in a sort of emotional, overreacting sort of way, but in the way of enacting drama, right? Very much in line with what the Hebrew prophets did, right? Doing things that were grabbing attention, that were pulling on symbol and story and history and capturing imagination to try to communicate a point forward. And quite frankly, that's a great lens to look through all of Holy Week through, right? Holy Week, it's Jesus' final week alive. A lot of you came from church traditions where it was a very busy week. It was kind of a big deal. And that's probably rightfully so. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, devote a third of their content, a third of their chapters to Jesus' final week and the resurrection. And so you really see it starting with Palm Sunday as this culmination of Jesus' ministry. A lot of confrontations that were happening are coming to the surface. He becomes more and more explicit about who he is, what he's trying to do, and ends up being a little more confrontational with the religious leaders and the religious establishment. So as we move forward this morning, let's have the lens on that Jesus wasn't trying to communicate something to them and then to us through this just really weird, out-of-place story of the fig tree. All right? So if that's the lens, we're going to assume that Jesus is communicating something through this interaction with the fig tree. The first place that I would suggest is we look at the context in the book of Matthew. Right? It's especially in the Gospels, it's a good practice to do. What happens before, what happens after. Okay? So before this little incident, he has the triumphal entry, right? He rides the borrowed donkey coming into Jerusalem. People grab palm fronds and are laying them down, which is why we call it Palm Sunday, when they shout Hosanna, right? Hosanna is a praise, but it really means save us now. And so they're basically saying praise to the one who's coming to save us. So Jesus enters into town. is doing that. And then he goes into the temple, and the next thing he does is flip some temple tables over and runs the money changers out, right? So kind of causes a scene, right? Then he leaves. They go to the town of Bethany, stay the night, comes back in the morning, passes the fig tree, curses it for always and eternity, and goes back to the temple, where he now engages the religious teachers of the law. The book of Matthew actually has like 4.5 chapters of him laying just a blistering critique of them. And in between these two examples is the fig tree. So it has something to do with the temple, right? As an aside, the first day when he's flipping the tables of the money changers or flipping the tables and driving out the money changers, that he's confronting the religious faction known as the Sadducees, right? So this was the religious leaders in their time that was in charge of the temple and the ritual and the sacrificial systems, okay? The next day, coming back into town, he's engaging with the religious teachers, the experts of the law of their time, right? That was known as the Pharisees. That was another prominent religious faction. And both of them had representatives that made up what was known as the Sanhedrin. Okay, this was sort of a legislative and judicial body that operated in their kind of religious culture. Most notably to us, that's the group of people that hand Jesus over to Pilate to be crucified, right, later in the week. So just to start with, he's offending one group at the beginning, offends another group at the end, and they hand him over to Pilate. You kind of start to see why. Jesus is... right, he's acting prophetically. He's drawing attention to things, and he's confronting them. So the fig tree has something to do with the temple. It's sandwiched between those two stories. So now the question is, well, what? What does it have to do with it? The first thing maybe to look at is to ask the question, what is a fig? Right? My experience with figs till this point in life, for the most part, has been in Newton form. Where a serving size should be a sleeve. But figs are fruits. They grow on trees. A fruit tree or a fruit-bearing tree was one of Jesus' favorite analogies for spiritual growth and spiritual maturity. Right? He would say things like a good tree bears good fruit, a bad tree bears bad fruit. Right? John 15, Jesus says, I am the vine, referring to Jesus, not to me. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those that remain in me, I remain in them, and you will produce much fruit. The Apostle Paul picks up this theme, probably most well known in Galatians 5, where he talks about the fruit of the Spirit, right? When we know and worship God as God is, it produces in us this kind of fruit of the Spirit: love, patience, kindness, gentleness. I think there's 7 of them. So it produces something in our lives and how we live, right? Our proper worship and understanding of God shows up in our life in how we live, how we see, how we treat other people. It's supposed to produce something in us, right? So that was a common analogy. It was one of Jesus' tools that he would use frequently. So picturing the scene, right in between these two confrontations with the temple leaders in Jerusalem, he comes in and he sees a tree that's bearing no fruit, right? And right, he curses it, essentially saying, right, you religious leaders who look like you have things all together on the outside, when people get close, realize there's nothing there. You're not actually bearing any fruit. There's a second layer to this, probably, and that's to ask about fig trees specifically. Okay, so they were pretty common to the area. Actually, I read that you could walk a very similar trail today and probably find fig trees. So it was a common fruit in their time in that region of the world. And so throughout Hebrew scriptures, the fig tree came to represent Israel, came to be sort of representative of Israel and Israel's prosperity, and on some occasions in the first century, sometimes even representative of the temple itself. All right, so before Jesus comes in and has this sort of debate, lays out this critique of the religious leaders, he curses the fig tree. Imagine somebody today wanting to advocate for a group or something that they need to come before Congress, right? And they're walking up to a hearing, they're walking up to the Capitol building, but before they get to the steps, they light an American flag on fire, right? No notes needed here, no further commentary. We get what they're trying to say, right? That is a blatant critique, a judgment that this is about failure to live up to ideals, promises, or the essence of what you're supposed to be, right? So Jesus is making, it would have been very clear to them, right, that he's judging them for something. So, fruit-bearing, fig tree, there's another sort of parallel to consider here, and that's the time that Jesus is coming into town, right? So he comes in on Palm Sunday. That was, in their time, it was the start of the Passover festival, right? Passover was, it still is, a major Jewish holiday. It was one of the few that required people to come into Jerusalem to go to the temple and actually required animal sacrifice. So you have Jewish people from all over the region, various distances, coming, all flooding into Jerusalem for this Passover festival. And they're doing so at great cost to themselves, right? So it's not just the cost of the trip. There's the kind of the opportunity cost, right? The cost of no longer not being able to work, whatever work looked like at their home, that leaving behind for the trip, for the pilgrimage. And then there's also the cost of the animal sacrifice itself. So a lot of people in that time, whether because they were too poor or because the journey was too difficult, would not bring an animal with them for sacrifice, and therefore would show up to the temple needing to purchase one. Okay? So, economics 101, you have a group of people willing to sell some animals for sacrifice, knowing that there's some people that are highly motivated to buy them. You can basically charge whatever you want, right? And there's another layer to this. There was a belief that they wouldn't exchange currency that had any like graven images on it, right? So nothing that had Caesar or whatever it might be. And there was a lot of local currencies, right? So in order for somebody to show up and to purchase said animal for sacrifice, they would first need to exchange their currency for a temple currency. Again, back to economics. If you know that you hold all the cards and the power, you can charge whatever exchange rate you want when somebody's coming through the door to do that, right? Knowing that they need the animal sacrifice, knowing that they're highly motivated out of faithfulness, right? So hopefully it makes that scene of Jesus flipping tables and chasing out moneylenders, gives it a little bit more light and context. So back to the fig tree. So one of the things that Jesus is saying is, right, there's all of these people coming into town out of faithfulness, right, expecting an opportunity to worship God, and they're coming into town, and the newly rebuilt temple looks impressive. The city looks prosperous. The religious leaders look particularly pious. But then you get closer, and the experience is one of extortion, one of being taken advantage of. It's a marketplace, not a place for worship. And so this sort of parallel is taking place. Right? Jesus is saying, right, you leaders who are here to provide this opportunity for people to worship are instead burdening them further, right? The temple in their culture was the spiritual heart of their religion. It was the place where heaven met earth. It was the place that you could go to encounter God, right? And yet Jesus is saying what they're encountering is a fruitless religion, right? That's extorting them and is not living out the way that they should. How many people in our culture want nothing to do with church or Christianity because of all the talk of love and salvation and purpose and belonging and meeting, but when you get closer, it's empty. It's like a tree that has leaves on it that looks good, but then you get closer and there's no actual fruit to bear. People going for spiritual nourishment and instead finding nothing. So if we have our prophetic lens on, I think that's what Jesus is communicating in this story, in this moment, when you read it in the context of everything else. Now, the next sort of odd exchange is the disciples' little conversation afterwards. I don't think their question is odd. How did you make the tree wither so quickly? And maybe that's all that question was. But if you think about it, they've spent years with Jesus. On the order of impressiveness, as miracles that they've witnessed, a dry tree is probably towards the bottom. And so maybe that's all it is. But perhaps they're piecing things together and are really asking something deeper. I don't know. But what I am pretty sure of is that Jesus' answer had a lot more depth to it than what our first glance would see. All right? So let's talk about this. Let's start with what I don't think Jesus is saying. So I don't think Jesus is saying if you just have faith and don't doubt, you can curse any person or thing that offends you. All right? You're in traffic. There's 3 lanes going down to 1. You do the nice, good, Christian, caring thing, and you leave some space for one person to get in, and that other person squeezes in right behind them. Curse you! I curse you! May your car never drive again. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. A personal pet peeve of mine, sorry if I offend anybody in here. I should say no offense, knowing I'm going to say something offensive. A personal pet peeve of mine, right, is the growing number of people that have their cell phone conversations in public exclusively on speakerphone. And so just curse them all, right? All curses to them. If you do it on a plane, a double heaping of curses to you. I did just get back from a trip a few weeks ago, sat next to a lady that opened beef jerky next to us. So if that were the case, curses all around, but I don't think that's what Jesus is saying or getting at. Right? Another layer, another thing I don't think Jesus is saying, especially in regards to the mountains, right? I don't think Jesus is saying if you just have faith and don't doubt that nothing bad is going to happen to you, or if anything does, you can pray it out of the way. All right? You got a big exam coming up. You didn't study for it at all. You decide, rather than try to study, I'm just going to pray here and have faith and don't doubt. And sure enough, you'll just ace it in the morning. All right? You are behind on your bills. You've racked up a large Target credit store account, and you don't know how you're going to get out of it. So just buy a lottery ticket, have enough faith, don't doubt, and that mountain of obstacles will be moved out of the way. You can hit the jackpot. So I don't think Jesus is saying that. I also don't think it's very literal, right? I don't think he's saying, like, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, just with your words, you can make sweeping geological changes in your environment around us. If that is the case, then I'm disappointed in all of you for not doing that in our building project. Could have saved us a lot. All right? Not mad, but disappointed. I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not denying miracles or the miraculous, and I'm not downplaying the power and the importance of prayer. I'm just suggesting that in this context, Jesus meant something a little more specific. Right? And the reason is, he says, if you have faith and don't doubt, you can tell this mountain to be thrown into the sea, and it will. He doesn't say a mountain. He doesn't say any mountains. He doesn't say the mountains in your life. He says this mountain to be thrown into the sea, and it will. So I kind of picture where they're at, and I picture Jesus pointing. Right? We know they're coming from the town of Bethany. There's probably 2 options that he could be pointing at. One would be the Mount of Olives, which would be the tallest point in the area. Would have been probably the more impressive. There was a lot of symbolic meaning around that. But most of the symbolism around the Mount of Olives had to do with the coming of the Messiah, which is why Jesus chose to come down the Mount of Olives during the triumphal entry, hashtag Palm Sunday. So that's one option, but I don't think, I guess I'm going to propose my thought of what a likelier option is. There was a second sort of mountain that would have been in the area, and that would have been known as the Temple Mount. Jerusalem was built up on Mount Moriah in the Old Testament, later called Mount Zion, and the temple itself was on a ridge on top of there, so that the temple that people would go to worship at was at the highest point. This was intentional. This was meant to symbolize the need to ascend to where God is in order to have an encounter. It was meant to be something that drew people's attention up. But in the context, right, of flipping tables and cursing fig trees and all the stuff that comes after, I'm going to suggest that maybe that's what Jesus was talking about. If you think this fig tree is something, if you have faith and don't doubt, you can tell that temple to be thrown into the sea. You can tell that system, right, that fruitless religion, all of its corruption, the governing narrative that you've lived your whole life beyond, you can tell that to go, and it will. At the risk of having you all fall asleep, the part of being thrown into the sea, I just want to have a little aside for a moment. It's hard to read culturally, right, when you're not a part of it, right? And so we have a lot of like figures of speech, hyperbole, stuff like that we use today that would be incredibly confusing to people in the first century if they were to read it, or probably to people in the future. Right? So for example, I'm a basketball fan, and actually this happened the last time I preached. I was up in the middle of the night. I got an alert about this absolutely groundbreaking and earth-shattering trade. Luka Doncic got traded from the Mavs to the Lakers. Never anything like it in the history of the NBA. Some of you, I'm just talking foreign to you, but it was, in the world of basketball, nothing's ever been quite like that, at least in recent memory. Right? It was groundbreaking. It's earth-shattering. We're still dealing with the ramifications of it. Right? You all know I'm talking about basketball, right? I'm talking about, grown men that get paid to throw a ball through a hoop. So we get the context of where this is at. Anyone that's outside of our culture, you could easily see where they might say, did they literally think the earth would like shatter in 100 pieces because this guy went to there, right? We know it's just hyperbole, it's kind of figure of speech, stuff like that. I'm not suggesting that this is all that it was in their time, but something to be thrown into the sea had some other kinds of meaning to it as well, right? It was a common phrase. Typically what it meant was handing something over into chaos, right? Or handing something over into destruction, okay? So if we start wrapping some of the pieces together here, Jesus says, if you have faith and don't doubt, you can tell this temple to be thrown into chaos, to be thrown into destruction, that essentially it is the end of your time, and it will happen. It will happen. If you were to continue reading, I mentioned earlier, right, Jesus comes back into the temple, curses the fig tree for always in eternity, and then debates with all of these Pharisees. He lays out critique after critique and parable after parable. It ends in Matthew 25. In the very end of Matthew 25, the last parable is the parable of the sheep and the goats. All right? That's the one where Jesus says, "What you fed me when I was hungry, you gave me drink when I was thirsty, you visited me when I was in prison." And they say, "Lord, when did we do these things?" He said, "Whenever you did this for the least of these, you did it for me." And then he turns and he says, to those who didn't give food to the hungry, for those who didn't give drink to the thirsty, for those who didn't visit the imprisoned or welcome the stranger, care for the poor or the outsider, he says, "Away with you, you cursed ones." Right? Away with you, you cursed ones. A little harsh. But if that's connected, triumphal entry, flipping tables in Jerusalem, cursing a fig tree, arguing with the Pharisees, culminating in "away with you cursed ones," right? He's tying a lot of these themes together. The fig tree incident might make a little bit more sense in that context. I feel compelled to share this as a little tangent aside for the 2 or 3 of you that are going to go read Matthew 25. Jesus uses some pretty harsh language there. In fact, the New Living Translation that we usually use here says that they'll be cast to eternal fire. Right? So I just want to be clear for a second here, right? So one, when we hear the word eternal, we think about it in terms of quantity of time, right? Something going on forever and ever and ever, right? Like a 3-year-old trying to tell you a story. It just never quite ends or gets to resolve somewhere. It goes on forever, right? That's not necessarily how they thought about eternity in their time. Eternity had something like eternal life had more to do with quality, more specifically with God's presence and or God's absence. The word that gets translated eternal is the Greek word aionios, which means an age, right? An end of an age. And so typically they use this kind of language to mark the beginning of something or the end of something, right? The beginning of an age or the end of an age. So where, again, for those that read ahead, if I don't think Jesus is saying, is threatening them with like eternal damnation. I think what Jesus is doing is telling them that they are living outside the age of God's presence, right? That their time is coming to an end, and that there is a new age, right? That is coming, that is going to happen. One that's going to be a lot more characterized by the fruit of how we live your lives, right? Not something based on geography and ancestry and ritualistic tradition. One based on proper right relationship and worship with God, followed by lives that look like Jesus, right? So I think that's what's going on in this, right? This whole exchange, this whole story. So when Jesus says to his disciples in that moment, have faith and don't doubt, I think he's not in this moment, in this context, he's not talking about just their generic problems in life. He's saying a particular kind of faith for a particular purpose, for a particular reason. See, Jesus knows what is coming, right? He knows generally where things are leading here. Like, he knows Good Friday is coming. He's going to eventually be crucified. And he's tried to tell his disciples that, but we know it doesn't always sink in. He knows at some point that the temple system in Jerusalem is coming to an end, right? And he's kind of predicted and shared that over and over again. So he knows that for his disciples, what they're going to experience is going to feel quite like an end of the world event, right? An end of an age. And so he's encouraging them to have faith and not doubt, but that they're in the right place, right? That there is a kingdom of God that is coming, and a new age that is beginning that they're being invited into. I think that's what he is saying to them, to have faith, and that's what he's saying not to doubt. So this Sunday is it's the last Sunday in Lent. Mike finished up sort of our Lenten sermon series last week. It was this idea of like, what if Jesus came? Right? What if Jesus showed up, came to where we live, work, and play, and worship? And the sort of premise of the series is that if Jesus came today, we would probably reject him for all the same reasons that people rejected him in the first century. Right? We all have these large governing narratives in our life that tell us what it means to be human, what a good life looks like, what we're striving after. Most of the time, those are things that are passed down to us. We just adopt them. We live, it's the water we swim in. We're not always aware of them. And so we can be sure that if Jesus came back, that those are the things that he would address in us, right? The things that we're aspiring towards and living towards that aren't actually real fruit-bearing worship. And he might do so in dramatic fashion. So, Holy Week that we're entering into as a church community is really a week to be invited into judgment. All right? Not judgment out of anger, not judgment out of punishment, but judgment out of love. In order to move from one place to another, right, we first have to shine the light on what that is, right? That's what judgment is. That's what Jesus was doing. He was shining a light on what was false and what wasn't working in their time. And we would expect that that would be the same thing to us today. So it's a sign of a time of judgment, but out of love, so that we can shine a light on the things in our life that we're chasing after life that are never fully there. And then there's this invitation, this step of faith to move towards something else. And I think Jesus is actually being very pastoral with his disciples here. So I think Jesus is very aware that to leave any type of large governing narrative behind and to enter somewhere new is a very scary place to be. You're filled with a lot of doubt, a lot of wondering, am I making the right choice? A lot of times there's a lot of fear behind it. And so I think Jesus actually is encouraging his disciples as they're shifting from the world that they've known it, the way that they've understood themselves as human beings worshiping God, to something different. That is a scary time. That's a difficult transition. That takes a lot of faith to do. We get to see this a lot in our church, and I know quite a few of your stories. And so I know for some of you, you have this sort of experience on like a religious scale, on like a church scale, right? A lot of you have been a part of a church community that you belonged to for a while, but then it stopped feeling like you were really welcome there. Maybe you felt like you couldn't ask questions. Maybe you felt like you couldn't actually be yourself. But it was a place that you were a part of for a long time and you realized is no longer actually able to nourish you, to care for you, to help you grow. You felt like you didn't belong anymore. And so you don't know where to go, but you know you can't stay there. And you find yourself in this middle space on the journey. So I think Jesus would say, have faith and don't doubt. Right? There's someone with you on the way, and it'll be worth it, whatever comes next. I think for some of you, it's been leaving faith systems behind. You might be in a season or a place of life, you're like, actually, I don't know what I really believe anymore. I just know how I was raised, or I know what I had my last experience was. I just know I don't believe that. Right? I know I don't believe that, but I don't know quite what I believe yet. And you're in this in-between stage. I don't think it gets said enough that how hard and difficult and challenging that can be, to be moving from something. But I think Jesus would say, have faith and don't doubt. Someone is with you on the journey, and it'll be worth it at the destination. The reality is, though, we don't live in a time and culture that's like traditionally religious, right? Our large governing narratives are not traditionally religious ones. They're more personal, right? And we've seen and had conversations and have experienced this ourselves, but maybe you're in a place that like you've lived under the assumption that you can control far more than you can control, and therefore you should. Right? And you're reaching a place where you can know where it's just exhausting to try to control the outcomes of all the things in your life. Right? You can't control your kids or what they're eventually going to grow up to do. You definitely can't control your spouse. You can't even control your own future as much as you think. And so you're in this place that feels like I'm exhausted, spinning my wheels, trying to make everything happen around us, and I just can't keep doing it. Right? So you know you can't keep doing it, but you don't know where to go next. That's a scary place to be. That's a tough transition to make. It takes a lot of faith to overcome a lot of doubt to move. Or maybe you're somebody that you've just lived the script out that you've been given. So you've done all the things that you thought you were supposed to do or were told that you were supposed to do. And by all looks of it, you take a step back and everything looks good. Life looks like it should be great. Right? I've got everything that I wanted to have at this point in my life. Why does it not feel complete? Right? Or I thought it might be more meaningful. Or why does it feel everything seems good and I feel a little guilty that maybe it feels a little hollow? So maybe you're in a place where like, I don't know who handed me that script. I don't know who told me that. But I'm pretty sure I don't want to follow it anymore. But I don't know what comes next. I think Jesus would say, have faith. Don't doubt. There's someone with you on the journey, and the destination, or what comes next, will be worth it. What comes next will be worth it. I happen to believe that most of those seasons in life is something that we're actually invited into, right? Sometimes it doesn't always feel that way. Maybe it feels like it was a prompting or just a feeling from the Holy Spirit, or maybe it's just something as simple as like your conscience, like I can't stay here anymore. But I think those are all invitations. And I think that's something that we are being invited into, that someone's walking alongside, and that whatever comes next is worth it. So last little bit I want to share for here, kind of ending on a caveat, which is probably not a great place to end. But what I don't want to have happen is I don't want you to walk away with just feeling more guilt and more weight over, especially if you find yourself in one of these like in-between spaces, in-between seasons. So Jesus tells his disciples, right, have faith and don't doubt. Well, turn the page, and what happens? They don't seem to have a lot of faith, but they do have a lot of doubt. They betray, they deny, they abandon, they run, they hide. Right? Their whole world crashes down before them, and they seem to be in fear and despair and confusion. And yet Jesus still shows back up to them with love, extending peace, and the invitation remains. So no matter where you feel like you're at, if you feel like you're not ready to take a step of faith yet, or you feel like you're just back and forth, you feel like you're just failing and making mistakes in your own life, I just say you're in good company. You're in good company, right? And thank God that what God thinks of us is not dependent on us at all. It's not something that we can change or influence. It's only something that we can live into. So let that hopefully be a little bit of encouragement. And as we enter Holy Week, I would just ask you to reflect. Is there are you in a place like that? Are you in a place where there's a large governing narrative, or there's a script or a belief system, whatever it may be, that you're just not sure is working anymore? Are you in a place where there's just things that you've held sacred that Jesus might be challenging? So I encourage you to think, what might those be? And while it is scary to address it, perhaps the God of love, the God revealed in Jesus, is inviting you into it. Amen? We're going to end our service by taking communion together. Practically, because I don't preach all the time and I forget this stuff. So what'll happen is after I pray, we'll invite you all to stand and to sing this kind of final worship song together. You'll get dismissed from the back rows, come up the center aisles, and receive the communion elements. The big basket is regular. The little basket is gluten-free. And so you grab your little elements, you go back to your seat. You can take them at any point during the song together. We do have volunteers that distribute those. And so if you just pause for a moment, they can speak the words that Jesus spoke when he first instilled this practice, right? My body broken for you, my blood shed for you. We do this practice every week, hoping that it is one. It is a ritual, it is a symbol, it is a spiritual habit that reminds us of that proper worship of who God is and what God is like. Right? That to the extent, right, learning love, to the extent that we know God who is love, may our lives reflect that. May the fruit of that worship be lives of love and patience and kindness and forgiveness and mercy. Whatever the others are. All right, let me pray. Gracious God, we love and praise you so much for who you are. Thank you for all of us here this morning, for the gift that it is to gather together and worship, for the gift that this space is to show up and to worship. Whether we've been here for a long time or we're new, we trust and thank you that this is where we're supposed to be in this moment. Pray that you continue to draw us closer to yourself. We may, as the Apostle Paul says, experience your love, though it is too great to understand fully. And may our lives be shaped by that. We love you. We lift this all up in Jesus' name. Amen.
It's like it was yesterday. I was praying for a miracle, scared to have a little hope. But now looking back today, seeing all the things you've done, I can't even add them up. 1, 2, 3, up to infinity. I run out of numbers before I could thank you for everything. God, I'm still counting my blessings, all that you've done in my life. The more that I look in the details, the more of your goodness I find. Father, on this side of heaven, I know that I will run out of time, but I will keep counting my blessings, knowing I can count that high. And I know the seasons never last forever, so God, I will remember all of the reasons my heart has to be grateful, all the times you've been faithful to me. God, I'm still counting my blessings, all that you've done in my life. The more that I look in the details, the more of your goodness I find.